Hello there. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how to break down and make classroom assignments online a little bit more manageable, at least to start with. So this isn't going to go in depth on any particular type of assignment, but it will mention a bunch of different kinds and some of the things that you can do when you get them. Because at the beginning of your semester, the first thing you should really do is go through your syllabi and figure out what assignments you're going to have and when they're going to be due, and then also what you're going to need to do about getting them done. And so that's really important. All right, so let's discuss some different kinds of assignments that you might encounter. So one of the key kinds of assignments, especially in online classes, are the learning kinds of assignments, which would be reading and watching videos. Now they're both slightly different, so you take them in slightly different ways. I actually have an entire series along with a written document on reading that is currently in my live videos, but I'm going to put together as a complete video set so you'll be able to see those. But when you're reading, what you really want to do is read in chunks and then again have sort of a preparedness for how are you planning to do this thing. I actually don't suggest diving instantaneously into reading, especially if it's technical reading. If it's something like a story, then go ahead, dive into it. But if it's technical reading, I actually say the very first thing that you should do is skim the entire reading. So if you have to read a chapter, skim through the chapter. Look for headings, look for figures, look for main words, get just a generalized sense about what it is. That begins the connections up here in your brain, and that gets you going. So that would be a step one, and it's an easy step. It's a 5-minute step most of the time to skim through your readings. If you're trying to be like, oh shit, I have to read this thing, set a timer, 5 minutes, you're going to go through the chapter and get a sense of what it's about. Cool. Then the next thing would actually be to start reading, but do it in pieces. Don't take in more than you can take in at a time. And while you're doing it, write things down as you go. So read a section, write some notes, read a section, write some notes. You're also not going to get it perfect the first time, and you honestly were never meant to, but read in chunks, take notes, try to sort of keep track of what you think you're doing and what will help you the best. And that's the starting points on reading. For reading, you want to give yourself blocks of time. You never know how long it's going to take to read. And so if you have a class that's a lot of reading, I would suggest just continuous, like 2 or 3 blocks of time a day or every other day, depending on how many classes with reading you have in which you do it. And however long you think you can focus on a reading for. If it's 20 minutes, then it's 20 minutes. If it's 5 minutes each time, then maybe a few more of those, but you'll still get it. I promise it works. Video watching kind of is the same way, except that you don't get a chance to skim through it most of the time. With watching videos, I strongly recommend you figure out what mode works for you. I actually read better than I listen, so I turn the captions on videos. And sometimes I speed them up because I can read faster than I listen, which is really kind of amusing, and my brain shuts off if things are taking too long. So some of you in the highly intelligent ADHD space probably understand what I'm talking about. Some of you might have more trouble taking in the information and you couldn't speed it up, but that's still a key thing. So, but I still suggest captions. It's a great idea. And now with videos, you do have a defined period of time. Hopefully they're short, but then you know what the defined period of time is. Add 5 minutes to it so that you can pause and jot things down as needed in the videos. And if there are videos that will be useful for referencing when you're jotting things down, jot the time mark at which you found it. So again, watching videos, prepare to watch some and take breaks, take notes. Again, jotting things down somewhere. I mean, even if you're a typer and that's your preference, that's my preference, at least you're moving the information. And don't do the information word for word. Try to summarize it. It helps. Summarizing is useful. So those are things that you would do. And so if I was setting up my syllabus and it said to read things, I would probably have on my calendar, 30-minute block that is read this thing for a period of time, and another block that is watch these videos. And I probably go back and forth between them, because if I'm switching modes a lot, it also helps me out. And also, if you're switching from reading to something moving, that can really help stimulate the brain just a smidge more. So you want to make that differentiator. Okay, so those are basic learning things. Let's kill them and talk about some different kinds of assignments that you might encounter. So for instance, let's talk about writing assignments. Now, writing assignments come in a bunch of different varieties. So you might have, especially in an online class, a discussion board type of writing assignment, in which case you need to find out what kind of discussion board it is and what the requirements are to make sure you're meeting your minimums. Now, typically for discussion board type of assignments, I would say the action steps you would take to it would be to look up the topic and make sure you have your background information on. So if you needed to still read or watch a video, you would want to do that. So you'd want to know the topics of the assignments ahead of time. Then with a discussion, you may or may not need to do sort of a brief, what points am I going to hit outline? But I would do at least a quick draft version. Most discussion boards are looking for something shorter. So if you draft it up real quick in a document somewhere, one of the keys of discussion boards, no matter what platform you're on, is don't type your draft into the box. If something shuts down, you might lose it. You don't want to lose it. Nobody wants to lose anything. Type all of your drafts into something that preferably auto-saves. Google Docs, it's my favorite. I literally have documents of drafts, and then I copy paste them into the right places. And that's just me writing emails to my classes. If you have like a discussion board, I would make a whole document for discussion board drafts and just put it there. And then, once you have a draft, it depends on how quickly you have to get on the discussion boards. I might separate these two things, do the draft, and then do a review of it before you post it, just to double check that you made some sense. Again, most of the time with discussion boards, they're meant to be a little shorter. They're meant to be a little bit less dead on. So you would do that. And then usually with a discussion board, you also need to schedule yourself an action item for respond. Sometimes you might do it immediately after you post, but most of the time, you actually want to wait a little bit to get more things up there and available. My class actually has completely separate times. I ask them to post in one period and respond in another. Some of them jump on the responses early, but it means that there's more time for people. So that's one possibility. Okay, so what's another writing type thing you might have? You might have short assignments. So I would say a short assignment is anything less than a page, paragraph, maybe two. For this one, again, the very first thing you want to kind of schedule into your 5-minute block is check on the topic. Find out what it is. Do you already know something about it, or are you going to need to find out something about it? And figure out what you're going to need to find out. So for instance, my students do short sort of journal assignments. And one of the ones they're supposed to do is on vitamin D as it relates to the skin and sunscreen. And it's essentially like, well, if you need the sun for vitamin D, but the sun can give you cancer, what do you got to do? So if you read that, you would then know that the next thing you needed to do was to schedule yourself 20 minutes or so to do just a smidge of research on the topic. Because it's not much. Usually a short assignment's not much, but a smidge of research, and then use that research to give yourself a brief outline. What are the 2 or 3 things you want to say in this space? If it's multi-paragraph, do you want to say in this paragraph and then in this paragraph? For a short assignment, that's probably another 20-minute block. And then you have at least a starting point. And when you outline, put those sources in there. Don't try to remember them or keep them open or remember all the details. If you find it on a website, write the thing in your outline and then just link the website and go back to it later. Don't keep 4,000 tabs open. You will lose them. I promise. All right. And then the other thing, of course, would be a long writing assignment, which are the ones that aren't due for a while. These are the key problem makers, because now you have to create, again, all of the internal mini assignments that go with them. I strongly recommend doing this. If your instructor doesn't do it for you, I do. I ask my students to break things down, and I actually am looking for things at particular times, although they're not hard due dates. They're soft due dates, but they're still something. And so what should you do under these circumstances? Well, kind of the same thing as the short assignment. First of all, topic. You might have to pick your own, in which case you might need to schedule yourself a 20-minute brainstorming session just to pick a topic. Watch out for scope. Don't overdo it. ADHD brains want to go all over the place. Gotta tighten. Make sure it's the right level of tight. If you're not sure, drop a line to your answer. There is nothing we like more than knowing what our students are going to write about so we can tell them how to fix it. I actually make that my first step is send me your topic. That's my first step on it. All right. Then my next step, of course, is, again, research and outline. Now, depending on the length of the assignment and the type of the assignment, in this case, it might be adapted a little bit. You might make a brief outline of what you know needs to be in it. Take your teacher's rubric, turn it into an outline. They're going to be checkmarking it anyway. Or if it's a very broad rubric, you might need to say, oh, well, this is my topic, and these are the bits I'm going to talk about. So my students write about the human body. They have to do a disease, and I'm like, talk about the disease in cells, talk about the disease in tissues, talk about the disease in organs. And so it's kind of given them an outline, but then they need to figure out what's going to go in there. So if my particular student is talking about a disease of the connective tissues, they then need to say, oh, well, it's tissues, but I also need to talk about fat, tendons, ligaments. And then they have a system. This is another time block. If you've got 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you would do that. And again, copy, paste your links into your outline. Go back to them later. You can deal with the whole citation thing later. Trust me on the later on that, but keep the links in there. Next up, write in chunks. And here's my favorite key thing. Don't start at the beginning most of the time. It's harder to start at the beginning. You're trying to like, how do I present this paper to somebody? It's hard. But if you have an outline, you don't have to start at the beginning. You can just start somewhere in the middle. My students can just start talking about cells. They can just start talking about treatments. You could just start talking about a section of whatever literary thing you're doing. You just start talking about a section of history. I don't know. I haven't been a humanities person in a long time. But again, writing blocks, write in chunks. And it doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to go back and review it. And in fact, I suggest doing that even in chunks afterwards. But that's the thing you're going to have to do, is you're going to have to review. If you are like me, you hate reading your written words any more than once when you wrote them, maybe twice to go over it. My very first manuscript went through like 35 revisions. I was dying at the end. My brain couldn't handle it. Also, get your friends to review for you if you need to, because then you don't have to read your words 16 times. Or do something funny, like go through it in reverse. I mean, you can't actually read the words in reverse, but you can read the paragraphs in reverse and just make sure they kind of make sense. But that's another chunk. If you break these down and put dates on them, then you're in a spot. I do that for my students. I say, hey, this thing should be due today. I'm not going to collect it, but if you have it, I'll look at it. If your professor offers you that, use it. And keep going at that point, keep doing things in chunks until you get there. If you need more chunks as you get closer and closer to deadlines, at least you can then keep track of it. Give yourself the deadlines for these things. If all you have for the long assignment is the end point, every week you should be working on some of these. Every week it should be on your calendar somewhere, and it should not be outdoable. It's got to be, even if it's just a few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, put a little bit of work into it because you'll get it somewhere. And that's the best thing to do. All right, that's not all the possible assignments you will encounter, but it's a good starting point for creating your list of things you have to in fact do, and then ways to prioritize them by putting dates on all of these. I'll show you another example of that in another future video, but I think this is a good start. Thanks.